Good morning. Today is Wednesday, July 5th, 2023. I have missed you for the last 2 weeks, and I am excited to be back together with you and look forward to continuing as we learn together each morning. The focus of the citizens of Israel and Jews around the world has rightfully been the deadly military action of the IDF, Israel's Defense Force, in Jenin, which began early Monday morning and officially ended last night, plus, of course, the terrible terrorist attack in Tel Aviv yesterday, and rocket fire overnight from Gaza. For a long time, Jenin has been the source of many Palestinian terrorists and acts of terror. Jenin has been described as the incubator of terrorism. Israeli officials say that in just this year alone, 2023, more than 50 shooting attacks on Israelis have emanated from the Jenin area, and since last fall, 19 militants have taken refuge in the Jenin refugee camp after carrying out attacks. To quote from the statement of the Orthodox Union, of which our synagogue, the ADATH, is a proud member, we stand in fervent prayer and express our strong support for the Israel Defense Forces operation in Jenin and elsewhere. The State of Israel has a duty to restore peace and security to its citizens, and we encourage their necessary actions to stop the current wave of attacks by dismantling and destroying the terrorist infrastructure and those who support it. We join with Jews everywhere and with all who love peace in praying for the safety and success of the soldiers of Tzahal in their principled battle for peace. And against that backdrop, the first message I share on our return from a wonderful and inspiring 2 weeks in Israel is a crucial statement of the most basic Jewish value. Now, this is a subject I did not hear in a single conversation during my 2 weeks in Israel, which is all the more reason for me to raise my voice today. In 2015, the Israeli High Court of Justice decided a case, and the decision was written by Israeli Supreme Court Justice Noam Solberg. The case involved the practice of the IDF of house demolitions of the relatives of those who commit acts of terror. So when, God forbid, there is a Palestinian act of terror, the home belonging to the relatives of the perpetrator, the terrorist, that home is demolished. That's a practice that's gone on for quite some time. The case that was brought before the High Court of Justice in 2015 argued that practice was discriminatory because it was only done in a case where Palestinians perpetrated acts of terror, but not when Jews perpetrated acts of terror. And therefore, since the imposition of this practice was not uniform among all people, Jews and Palestinians, the practice was discriminatory and should not be allowed. That was the case that came before the Israeli High Court of Justice. The Supreme Court rejected that argument, and Supreme Court Justice Noam Solberg wrote that decision. And in that decision, he wrote as follows. He first stated that the purpose of home demolition is to serve as a deterrent to others from carrying out acts of terror. let me just leave that to the side because that's a bit of a complicated issue of whether it actually is a deterrent. Military officials, security officials are split on that, but let's leave that to the side for now. That's not our subject today. But Solberg wrote that it serves as a deterrent against terror and that the Jewish public was already deterred and not incited. Now, Solberg acknowledged the existence of Jewish terrorism. There are acts of terror. It is sad and shameful to say Jews, Israelis who carry out acts of terror against Palestinians, against Arabs, against Christians, etc. It is a terrible stain and a horrible, horrible thing. So the justice acknowledged that it exists, but he asserted the difference between Jewish terrorism and Palestinian terrorism. The difference exceeds the similarity in many aspects, and particularly regarding mass attitudes. In other words, what is the reaction of the community when one individual from that community commits an act of terror? Firm, wall-to-wall condemnation in the Jewish community, which is not the case on the opposite side. So in 2015, Justice Solberg said that, yes, there are Jews who commit acts of terror, but they are roundly and widely condemned within our Jewish community, whereas Palestinians who commit acts of terror, the wider community applauds them and supports them. And so therefore, it makes sense that there should be house demolitions against the relatives of Palestinian terrorists, but not against the relatives of Jewish terrorists. That was the decision of the High Court of Justice in 2015. I do not think it is accurate today to assert firm, wall-to-wall condemnation in the Jewish community for acts of terrorism on the part of Jews against Palestinians. Jewish extremists in recent weeks have attacked several Palestinian villages in the northern West Bank, setting fire to homes, vehicles, and agricultural fields, and in some instances, shooting at residents with assault rifles. In the face of increasing acts of Jewish terrorism in recent weeks and months, there are pitifully few voices issuing clear condemnation of these crimes. As I said during my 2 weeks, and this is of course purely anecdotal, I did not hear this sentiment from a single person with whom I spoke in Israel. Today, I quote from 3 important Israeli voices, each of them from different political positions. The first, Rabbi Moshe Lichtenstein, the head of Yeshivat Har Etzion, just south of Jerusalem. He recently wrote an essay in which he described a double pain. Pain for the deaths of innocent Israelis who were murdered in cold blood in recent terror attacks in the West Bank and elsewhere, as well as pain for the acts of revenge by lost and misbegotten souls by extremist Jews. Rav Lichtenstein said that the entire Israeli public is responsible for creating the atmosphere that allowed these actions to take place. Of course, he stressed that security forces should act aggressively against terror. However, when extremists engage in revenge attacks against civilians in Palestinian villages that were not part of any attack. Harm to those who have not committed a crime is a moral and religious wrong that stands in opposition to all values of the Torah. It is a chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name. And Rav Lichtenstein went further. And please hear this carefully, because this is a frightening indictment. The expressions of understanding these acts of vengeance and the lack of decisiveness shown by educators, rabbis, the public, and our leaders, political leaders, toward previous acts of violence against Palestinians has led to the expansion of this phenomenon. Rav Yaakov Medan is the head of Yeshivat Ma'ale Gilboa, and he wrote, "With all the understanding we have of the terrible pain in the presence of the victims of severe attacks, Jewish victims of terror attacks that have occurred in Eli and other places, there is no moral or security justification for the vengeful actions that come from Jewish extremists towards Arab villages and hurt people who were not involved. I would add, even killing people who were not involved." Rav Medan went on, "Beyond the damage they cause, according to all security experts, the damage they cause on the Israeli attempt to tamp down and prevent acts of terror against Jews, beyond that, they create a distorted moral equation that compares us to the worst of our enemies. When these actions are carried out by Jews who identify themselves as Jews who keep the Torah, and when these actions are accompanied by the silence of their rabbis and other moral voices, or who should be moral voices, they create a terrible chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name. Finally, I share one last voice, a third voice. And I close with this message. This is a statement that was published a few days ago by many dozens of professors, staff at Bar Ilan University. Now, there are other such statements, but it happens that I had a meeting at Bar Ilan University, and I am in touch with one of the professors there who works on this subject, and so I am aware of this statement, and I want to share it with you. Several dozen, it could be a couple of hundred academics, professors, staff at Bar Ilan University wrote, "We comprise many different ideologies. Our political views span the spectrum. There are many issues on which we do not agree," this group of professors said. "But we join together to state in the most clear, sharp, and forceful manner, Ein v'lo yachol liot, it is not true, and it is not possible for it to be true, that there is any justification of revenge attacks by Jews against Arabs, Palestinians, who are not themselves engaged in the terror attacks that elicit this. It is extremely important to state clearly that any acts of revenge by Israelis, by Jews, against Arabs, which the frequency of which is increasing and the seriousness of which is increasing, these actions do not only violate universal human rights and international law, they also trample on the most basic Jewish Torah values. Politicians who rationalize and excuse and minimize such behavior, and the all too many rabbis and other moral voices who remain quiet, bear responsibility for the increase and culture of these revenge attacks. Among those of us who are signing this statement, the professors write, we have different opinions about what should be the outcome of the relationship between Israel and Palestinians. We have different opinions. However, these revenge attacks must be condemned and criticized, whether from the right or the left. Political ideology, religious ideology should make no difference. And so we state clearly and forcefully, Shelo zu darkenu, this is not our way, this is not our path. Zu eina darko shel Torah, this is not the way of the Torah. V'zu eina darko shel medinasenu, and this is not the way of our nation. This is not the path of our nation. Hashem oz le'amo yitain. May God grant strength to His people. Hashem yivarech es amo b'shalom. And may God bless His people with peace. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you all soon in person.